Hi, this is JP Morgan. Today on the Slanted Lens, I've got Simone Alise with me here. She's our beautiful model, and she's gonna help us show you how to push and pull film. So what does it mean to push and to pull film? So let's take a Portra 800. This is a really common film for people to push and to pull. So if we take a Portra 800 and we set the box speed, not at 800, but we set the box speed at 1600. Now basically we're underexposing the film by one stop, which means when we go to process the film, we've got to increase it. We've got to plus one stop it when we process it. So when we're processing, it's going to push it back up to what will be normal. That allows us to get, rather than a 2.8, an f4 when we're shooting, but the reality is there's always a give and take. We may have gained a stop in exposure, but we've gained contrast, we've gained grain, we've gained all those kinds of things that are the negative, and that's the downside of it. When you pull your film, it means that you're overexposing it by a stop. And now you're gonna cut the time short in the developer so that it won't be too dense, and that's gonna have its own creative look and effect. Pushing and pulling film is more about creating contrast and grain. It's more of an artistic look than it is a way to save film or to give you more exposure. Now you can push like a roll of Tri-X, a stop or two stop to give you more exposure to work inside. But the reality is really pushing and pulling is about giving yourself a creative outlet and looking at what that result is. So let's just look at these, see what they do, and I'll talk more about over and underexposing and exactly what it means to push and pull film as I talk through this whole process. By the end, I pray, I hope, we'll all understand what it means to push and to pull film. So let's get back in there and let's get going. We got to get some images shot, and our light's gone. A special shout out to Richard Lab, a professional lab that really knows how to process film. They know how to push and pull film and give you the look that you're looking for, so check out Richard Lab. So we're back here at the studio now, and the film went off to Richard Lab where they processed it, then they scanned it. And so we processed it according to our push and pull, the way we exposed it. Now we're gonna take a look at what that pushing and pulling does to each one of these four film stocks. We've got Fuji 400, we've got Portra 400, and we've got Portra 800. The first image is a Fuji 400, and it is pulled one stop. That means we exposed it at 200, which means we're giving it more exposure, and then we cut the amount of time in the developer. So it'll give us a normal exposure. So this one though, in doing that, what it does is it decreases grain and it's going to make the film a little flatter. And we certainly see that here. The shadows are very open, the highlights are starting to be pretty bright on her face, and the grain is pretty soft. Then if we look at the Fuji 400 that we pushed to 800 or plus one stop, and then we gave it more time in the developer to compensate, this one now has more grain. We've got more grain and the contrast builds. When we go to the Fuji 400 that we pushed two stops, now we shot this at 1600, we increased the time of developer by twice, and this gives us an exposure now that is really way more contrasty. The blacks are very deep, the whites are very white, and the grain has grown. So that's our situation inside in a contrasty situation. Now if we look at outside in a more flat situation, the Fuji that's been pulled one stop feels a little too flat. We're already in a flat situation, but the Fuji that's been pushed to stop has a nice highlight on her face. The blacks are starting to look a little nicer, whereas the blacks in the first one are just too soft and too mushy. Even when we go to pushing at two stops, it looks really nice in this situation because we're in a very low contrast situation, and pushed film loves low contrast. So I think the plus two stops look fabulous in this really low contrast outside look. Now if we look at this in a situation that's kind of like, it's more open shade with a little bit of highlight coming in from the side, it seems like the plus one stop in this situation is a little bright, but the plus two stops is pretty nice. It's, again, a pretty low light, pretty flat situation. The color stays pretty consistent through the three of them. The one in the middle, the Fuji 400 plus one stop, seems a little too bright to me. Now let's take a look at the Fuji 400 with her standing next to that red in the background, and just look at how the color has shifted on her face. The -1 is a little warm, but not bad. The one that's +1 is a little warmer yet, but then the one that's +2 is starting to cool off. So there's a Fuji 400. So let's take a look now at the Portra 400. This film, when you pull at a stop, seems to be very flat. If you look at this shot inside, which is a very contrasty situation, we're holding the highlights on her face, the shadows are very open, it's just a very, very flat image. Outside, same thing in that open shade, the image is flat, the blacks are not very deep, it almost feels a little milky to me. Same in that open shade outside where she's standing, has a little more sunlight in it. We see some highlight, the blacks just aren't very deep. Of course, the color rendition against that red wall there, the colors feel muted. It's shifting just a little yellow on her face, so it's just a very, very flat film when you pull it one stop. Now when you push it a stop, it goes the other direction. Just as it was very flat when you pulled it, it gets very contrasty when you push it. The highlight on her face got very, very harsh. The shadows got very, very deep. We go on to the outside. Now we've got a nice highlight on her face. The blacks are pretty deep. This is not a bad look here. In that really kind of flat light, it seems to really sing because it's gained a lot of contrast. Same outside in that open shade, you gain a lot more contrast, so it's looking very nice. Got some deep blacks. The grain is still very nice. You don't see a lot of grain there. The colors are very vivid here, but it's kind of shifted a little bit on her face. It's just a little bit yellowish. Now, if we go to pushing 2 stops, what is going to happen? More contrast. Look at the inside in that really, really contrasty situation. Highlights are starting to blow out. The shadows are starting to clog up. We got heavy grain though. I love the grain up in the wood, and I just love the look of that grain in the background. Outside, same thing, but our highlights are getting too heavy. Blacks are getting too heavy. So it seems like with that Portra 400, at +1 stop, that shooting at 800 is a nicer spot for it to live in. Let's go on to the Portra 800. So here's a Portra 800 -1 stop, so it's been pulled 1 stop. Again, we have it is not as flat as it was as the Portra 400, but it's still very flat. We have open shadows, bright sunlight in that really contrasty area inside the house. Outside, it's pretty flat. We see a little bit of highlight. It's a little more contrast than the 400 had. In that open shade, in the trees, we see it's just a little bit flat. It's a little bit pasty feeling. So here's looking at the color on the background. Skin tone does go a little bit on the reddish side, or the yellow side, but now when we push it a stop, that changes everything. The grain starts to build a lot. You see the grain in the background is just a very heavy grain structure. It's very nice. Our highlights have become very bright, so the contrast has been built. Outside though, that contrast is very helpful, and we get a nice highlight on our face now. We're getting nice blacks. Same thing in the trees. That contrast is really helping us out. The blacks are looking nice. The highlights have become alive a little bit again, and it's not near as flat looking. So that really contrasty film in these flat situations outside looks excellent. Now color-wise, inside, the color's pretty clean on this. Her face is definitely gone yellow. But there's a look at that Portra 800. Very contrasted when we push it 2 stops. Not quite so much contrast. We go 1 stop. Very, very flat when you pull it a stop. Let's take a look at these 3 films compared to each other. Contrast on these looks pretty similar. The Fuji 400 is just, color seems a little cleaner to me. The grain looks very nice on all of them. The contrast is a little heavier on the Portra 800 than it is on the other 2. But the Portra 400 and the Fuji 400 are very similar. The Portra 400, maybe the color is a little cleaner. But there's a look at those 3 compared with each other. So here's our -1 in that outside kind of low contrast situation. The Fuji on the left is really nice. I mean, the skin tone is nice. It's built a little bit of contrast there. They're still all very, very flat. Really, the Portra 800 is the one that has the most contrast, kind of has a nice look. 400 looks just a little yellowish. It's gone very yellow to me in the middle compared to the other 2. So there's a look at those 3. All right, so here's our +1. That Fuji at +1 has given us a lot of contrast because we're in a contrasty situation. The Portra 400 is just clogging up, and the Portra 800 is very, very deep, very heavy. So it looks like that really the Fuji is handling the +1, giving us nice grain, giving us a little nicer skin tone. The skin tone is just not quite as blotchy as we get in the other 2. Just a very pretty, the Fuji feels very pretty in that situation to me. So now let's go outside in that open shade with our +1. So here's our 3 film stocks compared to each other at +1. You know, it's interesting to me because they are very similar to me. The color rendition is very nice. I really found the Portra 400 at +1 has a very nice color rendition. The contrast is a little heavy on the Portra 400, although it doesn't look that much different than the Fuji 400. The Portra 800 at +1 is giving us some nice grain in the background, which I really like. The contrast has been built so we get a nice look on our face. All three of these films are enjoying this low contrast situation. They're responding well to it because they're building enough contrast to make it look good, and in that it looks very good. So they're working out really well here. Boy, it's just an interesting comparison as which one looks better. I like the skin tones on the Fuji a lot. The Fuji 400 skin tone is very nice. The Portra is just, the skin's starting to feel a little blotchy in both of those. So here's our three films that have been pushed 2 stops, plus 2 stops. You know what? In that really contrasty situation, the Fuji's looking pretty nice because the contrast is not as heavy as you get with the Portra 400 and the Portra 800. The Portra 800 is really shifting green in a pretty bad way with this. You've seen it also with the Portra 400. I do like the grain that we're getting with that Portra 800. It's just a very pretty look. Let's look at these things outside now. If we see these at plus 2 stops in that outside open shade. Only the Fuji 400 and the Portra 400 have been shot at 1600. The Portra 800 has been shot at 3200. So it's pushing the limits here for that Portra 800. So if we look at this, our Fuji 400 pushed 2 stops. It looks really pretty. The color is nice. The grain is nice. You have a grain feel about it. The contrast is not too heavy. I mean, you feel contrast building, but not like the Portra 400. The contrast is building in a major way with that Portra 400. And of course, the Portra 800 has been pushed 2 stops to 3200. Is yellow on her skin. It's just really gone extremely yellow, and just kind of lost its color rendition there. Is really, really sad. But I'm liking that Fuji 400, the Portra 400. Those are nice films in that really low light, non-contrasty situation. They bring a lot of contrast to the party, and that's where they're going to look good in that situation. So let's wrap this up. What have I learned in this situation? I've learned quite a bit about the Fuji that I didn't know before. The Fuji is very, very flat when you pull it, and not necessarily my favorite when you pull it. I kind of like the Portra 400 better when you pulled it. I like the Portra 800 when you pulled it. But when you pushed it, that Fuji 400 was beautiful. It really, when you push it a stop or 2 stops, if you want grain and heavy contrast, then that Portra 800 push 2 stops is the film for you. It really is a great look. All of these have an application and a time and a place when you shoot them. It's a stylistic decision. So if you want that look as a throwback, it's a beautiful thing to do to push your film or to pull it. There's no right answer here. These films are going to respond differently in different situations. So it really depends on what you're shooting and what you like, what you want to achieve. Post some stuff up on our Facebook group. We'd love to see the things you're shooting, love to see the images you're getting. We can learn from that experience. How does this respond to a white wedding dress? How does this respond to a black tux? That helps us to see what these films do in different situations and what that pushing and pulling does to be able to gain contrast and to be able to show an interesting look there. So there you go. Post some stuff on our Facebook group. We want to see the things you're doing. Follow us here on The Slanted Lens. Leave some comments below. Tell us the things you would love to see in the future. And tell us what you enjoyed about the lesson today, and we hope to hear from you. And keep those cameras rolling and keep on clicking. It's December and time for our mega giveaway. We're giving away stuff to 38 winners. Stuff from Edelchrome, from Black Rapid, from SKB, from Platypod, from Vanguard, from Datacolor, from 9 Solutions, and our downloads. So, and also Richard Lab. So get over to theslantlens.com/give and sign up today. You can also sign up on Facebook. Don't miss out. Hi, this is JP Morgan. Today on The Slanted Lens, we're out here on location. Actually, we're not on location. We're right in front of my house. But that's okay, because it feels like we're off in the leaves of New England, even though New England is now in snow, and we're just here in Los Angeles, and the leaves are just turning because it's 70 degrees outside. Anyway, sorry about that, back in New England, but you could always live in LA, pay twice as much in taxes and everything else. Be a great place for you to live. All right, never mind.